Okay, I'm taking the option cards out. Got 2 of them out already. And what you want to do here is when you're taking your option cards out, make sure you note which slot that they were plugged into if you're just switching the system out, because if you do that and you're not, rebuild the data on the hard drive, you're using the same hard drive, it is a possibility that you can confuse the system because certain slots have certain interrupts assigned to them most of the time. And sometimes the BIOS does it when you boot the system up. Sometimes you can go into BIOS and configure each slot manually. But if those interrupts change because you've put a sound card or something in a different slot, then it's going to try to use the new interrupts for the sound card. And I have seen drivers or just Windows kind of get crazy and not detect the sound card because the interrupt has changed. So the best thing to do is to put them back in the same slot unless there's just a reason you really need to change the slot position. And then you want to make sure you go in and make sure that everything in your device manager is detected correctly and that it's functioning properly, or you may have to reinstall the drivers. Okay, got all the option cards removed. All those are out of the system. I've disconnected all the cabling, all the connections for the front panel, the buttons, the lights, all the connections for the floppy hard drive, CD-ROM drive, all the power supply connections, they've all been disconnected. The motherboard is ready to come out. There's just, I think, 6 screws holding the motherboard in. There's one pretty close to each corner, and there's a couple at the middle of the board. Now, if you're doing a motherboard, it may have screws like this, and it may have plastic standoffs, or it may have a combination of both. You just want to make sure that any point that it is mounted at, that you get all those out before you start pulling on the motherboard, because if one's still connected, you may damage or crack the motherboard if you go pulling on it too hard. And I'm leaving the ribbon connectors for the CD-ROM drive and the hard drive connected just to make it a little easier, because it'll just slide right in the new system and I can connect those back up when I get the black CD-ROM drive and this hard drive transferred over to the other case. Okay, the motherboard's been removed. When you do pull it out of the case, you want to make sure that you pull it carefully. Don't damage your motherboard in the process, and try to handle it by the edges too. Try to put your fingers at the edges of the board. Try not to put them on top of the component side or the bottom side. If you have any static discharge off your body into one of the components, it could damage a component. But I want to say, depending on the area that you live in, I have been messing with computers for probably a little less than 20 years, and there's only probably one time that I know of that might have had static damage to any component, and that was because I was pulling cards in and out and swapping them very quickly trying to test some cards, and I don't even know if it was that or if it was some residual power left over from the ATX power supply. Maybe it didn't dissipate, and pulling in the option card, pulling it out, putting another one back in might have caused it. But I have yet to see any component damage from static electricity, but it can happen, and be careful. I'm actually doing this on carpet, and these are older components. I'd probably be even more careful if it was something brand new, but you've just been warned, that's all I'm saying. And I'm not the safest person with this stuff. If it was somebody else's system, it was brand new, I'd have a wrist strap on and have myself grounded to the chassis or something like that. But if you just touch the computer chassis, sometimes you can dissipate the ground or, dissipate the charges in your body, and there won't be any risk of that. Also, make sure that where your motherboard mounts, that the new plate, the little I/O plate at the back of the new case, is going to match up with the components. Here's the way the back of the motherboard looks where the I/O is. That's all your PS2 connectors, parallel, serial, all those things. And you might have some sound connectors in the back. And here's the new case. It's identical. That's the standard on all of them, but you have some knockouts you can use. If that doesn't work, your new motherboard should have come with an I/O plate that fits it if it's something that's not standard. Okay, before we install the motherboard, got to put these standoffs in place. They come with new cases most of the time. Sometimes they come with motherboard, most of the time with the cases. And sometimes, as in the case with this system, they're pre-installed and you can't remove them unless you do that. I had to jerk that one out just so the motherboard could mount in place properly, because it was in the way when I originally installed that motherboard in this older system. And they're put in place at the factory. They don't have any threads, and it's almost like they're they're almost riveted in, and I had to really get some pliers and twist on that to get it out so that the other motherboard can mount properly. But in the new system, they're completely removable, and I've already got them in place. They were 6, like I said, at the upper 2 corners, in the middle of the motherboard, and then down at the lower 2 corners. And they're just threaded posts. They have threads on the bottom. They go down into the metal, and on top they have like a cylindrical hole, and it's got threads in it, and it lets the screw come down from the top side of the motherboard, mount it tightly, and keep it off of the metal so it doesn't ground out. Okay, we got the motherboard mounted in the new case. It's all the way mounted with all the screws. The front panel cables have been attached for the power LED, the hard disk activity LED, and the reset and power switches, and the speaker connection. And we're about to put the power supply in next. And like I said, I'm using the power supply there that came out of the old case. It's only a 235 watt, but I've got a lot of identical ones of those, and they're all going back in these machines. Salvaged a few parts out of the old system, just the drives and some LED switches and the speaker from the case. The case is getting trashed, but that's just for future projects if I need, some wiring switches or something like that. And after we get the power supply in, we'll put the option cards back in. Okay, we've got further along. System is practically put back together into the black case. We've got all the option cards in the correct locations, tightened down. Some of the option cards were a little bit aggravating because the tabs that slip down in front of the motherboard, sometimes they give a little trouble, and that's just always the way it is. And you have to sometimes flex them forward or back slightly to get the faceplate of the option card to line up and go all the way down and seat the card into the slots. But they all finally went in pretty good. We got all the wiring connected from the power supply to the motherboard. The ribbon cables are connected to the hard drive. I got the hard drive mounted. Power supply is mounted or attached to that. The CD-ROM drive, I went ahead and put one of the black ones in. It'll probably be the one that'll stay in this system, because the others I'm just going to hook to this system and test temporarily. Went ahead and put one stick of RAM in just to test it with MEM test when I boot this system up, and we're going to do the rest of them in that box of memory one at a time, just to make sure all those modules are good. And then when I'm done, I'll put 3 modules in this one just to go ahead and max it out on the RAM that I've got available anyway. Power supply is in, mounted in fine, and pretty much this whole system is just about done. We just have to close her up. And like I said, I might come back later and put some floppies in. And you can probably tell on this video, very slight difference in the tint of the black CD drive and the front of the case. It looks more evident on the video actually than it does in person. Looks like it matches a little closer in person, but it looks like it's showing up on the video as a grayish. It is black. But whole system is pretty much together. I'm just about ready just to turn it on and start testing it out, make sure everything's okay. And once I do that, I'll show you this system hooked up and running real briefly, and then we'll start on the next system.